It is the penultimate episode, which is just one of my favorite words. So I'm excited to use it. I'm also excited that I am almost finished with this whole process. I wish she were still around. I could use a grandma's hug right about now. One of my theories is that kissing is like blood types. What I mean when I say that is that certain blood types are universal donors. One blood type is universal recipient, and the other is only compatible with its own type. He was 24 years old. I did not know that because obviously if I had, I don't think I would have gone. His question, can you even still have kids? Welcome to 40 Dates in 40 Days. I'm Sarah Beth, your host. I recently turned 40 and decided to go on 40 dates in 40 days in hopes of finding my person. I'll be documenting this in close to real time and wondering right along with you, will she meet someone? So grab your cup of tea, we are going to spill it, settle in, it is time to yap. Welcome back to 40 Dates in 40 Days. This is episode 13. It is the penultimate episode, which is just one of my favorite words. So I'm excited to use it. I'm also excited that I am almost finished with this whole process. We'll talk more about what this journey has been like for me on the whole next week in the finale, but it's not been easy. I will tell you that. If I look tired, if you're watching this on YouTube or Spotify, I am a little physically tired. I also just got my lashes lifted yesterday and I can't wear mascara again yet. I did not think about that properly. I was going to wear my glasses, which are cute, but then my lights are reflecting in them and that'll be annoying. So I'm just going to have to look tired. It is what it is. So before we dive in today, I've got my tea. This is a little Precious Moments mug. It says granddaughter. It's hard to show you without a glare. That my grandma gave to me, my mom's mom. We were close. She passed away maybe about 15 years ago, but I wish she were still around. I could use a grandma's hug right about now. So instead, I'm using this mug in her honor and thinking of her today. At the beginning of this project, I was so gung-ho. I was doing what you're supposed to do with social media, which I know how to do because I built the tip jar. But I was posting almost every day. I was doing a variety of content. I was posting on TikTok. Of course, TikTok ran me off because they were so mean. But I was, very involved on social media. But as today's got harder, I just was finding that my attention was shifting more and more towards the things in my life that actually make me money, like my tip jar content and things on my website and so forth. And I just did not have the bandwidth to keep posting about this podcast. And so I say all that to say, because I've not continued to be really engaged on social media, I don't have new bad or good date stories that have come in because I've not been asking for them. So if you're listening to this, I could still use another for next week's finale. But I did think back, I know I have many more bad date stories in my own repertoire. What can I share? And I was remembering one of the only dates I went on in college. I was such a late bloomer, which I blame on many of the same reasons that I am now 40 and single. But I did freshman year go on a date real early in the year. A friend of mine set me up with her ex-boyfriend. They had been high school sweethearts, went to the same college, but they were broken up. And she said, no, it's fine. And this was a true blind date. I had seen one picture of him she showed me, and he was not my type. So I was a little nervous anyway for that reason. But we went out. I remember, so I'm 17 at this point. I went to college a year early, just a little babe in the woods. We go to Steak and Shake. And of course, being a 17-year-old girl in 2002, I was worried about gaining weight and all that. So we go to Steak and Shake. He talks the whole time about how much he wants to gain weight for bulking up, men wanting to gain weight reasons. And he doesn't finish his shake. It's Steak and Shake. So I don't want to bulk up. And I feel like, well, I can't finish it now. If this guy who's just spent this whole time saying how much he wants to gain weight can't finish his, then who am I to finish mine? And I was mad because I really wanted to finish that shake. Well, then he didn't really have much of a plan. We drove around. We ended up at his buddy's house. This memory is so vague. It was just a weird night. I think somebody ended up like wrestling at his buddy's house. It was just bizarre. What I do remember is he took me back to my dorm and we were sitting outside, and it was the first time in my life that somebody said, "I'll call you," and never did. And I wasn't upset. I wasn't interested either. So it was fine. But I'd never experienced that before. I'd never experienced the polite, "I'll call you," when you don't actually mean it. So that was a good lesson for me. Well, turns out they didn't stay broken up for long. They got back together. They've been married ever since. And I'm really happy for them. I said he wasn't my type. My type was very, very narrow back then. And he's quite good looking. They're a cute couple. They have a cute little boy. So, who might be a big boy now. I don't know how old he is. So I'm glad it all worked out for them. Another good lesson, maybe don't go on a date with somebody's ex. I have set up a friend with a guy I had dated before, but it was years removed, and he and I had gone on 3 or 4 dates. I mean, nothing significant. It was not my high school love. I don't think anybody that I've ever really cared for, I could set up with somebody else, period. And maybe she couldn't either, and that's why they got back together. And we're also 17 and 18 years old. Who knows what we're doing? But yeah, so that was just a weird date. Nothing terrible, but weird, and several lessons learned. A good date. I'm going way back to high school now. Again, I'm a late bloomer, so I didn't go on many dates in high school. And I went to a private school that was very traditionally conservative, and so they didn't have dances. Same school does now, which makes me mad. But back then, we just had formals, so they were basically dinners. So our Christmas party in high school, this was my freshman year, I went with my friend Ray. I don't think he listens to this, but he does engage with my social media sometimes. So if you're listening, Ray, you're a good date. We were just friends. I don't think he was interested in me. His brother actually was dating a girl who's 2 years ahead of me that we had the same birthday, and they're still married, so good for them. So Ray took me, and the 4 of us went together. I'm sure his brother drove us or something. It was just so nice and normal, and I didn't have a lot of nice and normal in high school, and I don't remember a whole lot about it. I remember going to his house and his mom taking pictures. I do remember my dress. I wore a green velvet dress that actually wasn't that cute, but whatever. I remember we're sitting at like a banquet table. This party was just at our school for Christmas, and they had little candles on the table. And I don't know if it was Ray or somebody else we were sitting next to. I think it was somebody else that was sitting with us. But typical high school boys, there was curling ribbon as decor on the table. He's dropping the curling ribbon into the candle. It catches on fire, of course. And so he like flicks it, and it lands on my nose, and I had this big scar on my nose for a long time. And we played Dirty Santa or White Elephant or whatever, and I, for some reason, decided to be selfish. There was a bowling ball. Okay, so this is high school, right? There's a bowling ball, and that is the hot commodity. Everybody wants it. I didn't want the bowling ball, but it came around to my turn, and I had the opportunity to steal the bowling ball, and it would have been frozen. If you're familiar with White Elephant, you can steal gifts, but after so many times, whoever has it keeps it. It can't be stolen anymore. So I had the opportunity to get the bowling ball. It would have been mine. I could have given it to Ray, and he would have been happy because he wanted the bowling ball. But instead, I just decided to be selfish and get something for myself. Well, I ended up with a can of soup, and I don't know who got the bowling ball. Well, that has haunted me how old was I? 14. So for 26 years, is that the right math? 26. Yeah. So for 26 years, it has haunted me that I was so selfish and did not get this bowling ball for Ray. Well, a couple years ago, he and his wife were in town for a concert. And so the 3 of us went to lunch, and it was fun to catch up. But I brought up that story, and his wife said, "He's never mentioned it, so I think you're okay." I said, "I was just so selfish." And I'm not sure Ray even remembered. I don't remember what he said, but it was obviously not a big deal. But we just had a good time. It was fun. Like I said, just a sweet, normal high school experience. And we never dated after that. We went as friends. Whether he was interested, it didn't ever become anything like that. We just stayed friends. He and I actually, I'm pretty sure, freshman year I was on the homecoming court, and I think there was one person, guy and girl from each class, and I'm pretty sure he was the guy that was elected. So we had fun. But that was a rare good date that I had in high school or college. Both of them I was pretty dateless. As far as a good relationship, when I started asking for good relationship stories, I was really thinking of one of my older sisters. I have two older sisters, and I think they both have solid marriages. But the older one in particular, she and her husband are such a team. They are both retired. She was a teacher. He, I think, did masonry, something like that. But they're both retired early, young, I should say. And so they have started a cleaning business together, and they just work really well as a team. They enjoy each other's company, and that's evident when you're around them. When you're with them, it feels very peaceful. You don't feel this undercurrent of strife between them, which is what I grew up with. So I'm very familiar with the undercurrent of strife. But they genuinely seem to enjoy each other's company. They've raised 3 girls who all are married now, which I find ironic that this next generation, they're in their 20s and 30s, so they're not that much younger than me, is my point. But still, a whole different generation, because they are my nieces, are all married. And then in my family, my brother, sister, and I are all single. I have talked about this ad nauseum in therapy. I won't get into all the reasons I think that is now. But anyway, they've raised 3 girls that are just good humans, married, good parents. 2 of the girls have kids, and they're good parents. And I just think part of the reason that their daughters were able to find somebody and develop their own quality marriage is because they saw it modeled in their parents, my sister and her husband. And they're just fun to be around. And I remember one of the last times I saw her, she said, when you've been married as long as us, they've been married 37 years, something like that. She said, you really have to think of ways to do fun things. But they do think of ways to do fun things. They go on service trips with their church together. They both are very involved in their church. And I'm not saying those are the fun things per se. They also go on vacations, and I just think they put a lot of effort into finding things to do together and ways to be together, to serve together, to laugh together, to enjoy each other's company. And that's really admirable. And I think one of the things that I am most looking for is just a friend. I am 40. I'm successful. I don't need a provider. I don't even know if I need a good dad to my children, because that may or may not happen. I mean, I would look for somebody who would be a good dad. If we did somehow end up having a child, then I would want somebody who'd be a good father. But I'm saying that I don't need a lot of the traditional roles for a husband. I don't need those at this point in my life. What I want is a friend, just somebody that I really like talking to, that I value their opinions, that I can share the mundane with and do fun things, and that I think is cute. So anyway, my oldest sister in particular, I think models that really well. And I'm just happy for her and for her family. And I'm glad that my other older sister also has a good marriage. She's been through a lot with her health recently, and I know her husband's been there for her. And that's also something that's really important, I think, especially as you're getting older, somebody who will stick by you in those hard times. So I'm glad that they both have that. Okay, before I dive into this week's dates, I was reading recently Atomic Habits. I reread it. I go through stages where I consume all the productivity books and hope it helps me make 1 or 2 changes in my habits, and then I'll need to revamp them at some point, and I'll read some more, reread the old ones. So I was rereading Atomic Habits, and he was talking about good habits. One of the ways to cultivate good habits is to reduce the friction associated with them, and to increase the friction associated with the bad. Prime your environment. So like if one of your bad habits is biting your nails or whatever, this is a terrible example. This was not in his book. But if your bad habit is biting your nails, wear gloves, because then there's a lot of friction. There's a lot of effort that is required to take off your glove and then bite your nails. And so you want to increase the friction for the bad habits, but decrease it for the good ones. So if you want to develop a good habit, going for a run first thing in the morning, he says, lay out your clothes the night before. I actually might have gotten that from somewhere else, but that is an example that I have heard. Lay out your clothes the night before so that all you have to do is get up, put your clothes on, and go, instead of trying to then pick out what you're going to wear. And, so just reducing the friction of your good habits to make it easier on yourself. So he gave an example. He said, dating apps reduce the friction of social interaction. And that is for sure true. I mean, all you have to do is open the app and swipe. You don't have to get dressed, go out, spend money, work up the courage to talk to a stranger. I would say, though, obviously, as we've talked about before, I think the apps in their pure form at the beginning were a really good thing. I think in their form now, they often are doing more harm than good. And I am seeing them decrease. I've seen articles about this, that their usage is going down. And just anecdotally, I think that's true. So I'm wondering if some things worth having do require friction. They require you to put something into it. And certainly with dating, I think that is true. Your relationship is probably only going to be as good as the effort you put into it. So maybe finding somebody is only going to be as good as the effort you put into it. I'm speaking in broad generalizations, obviously. I'm not fully thought through this concept, but it did stand out to me when I was reading the book. And I'm just curious if you all have any thoughts about dating apps reducing the friction of social interaction. Is that good? Is that bad? And how, I don't know. Any ideas on that? I'd love to hear them. One thing I've thought about recently, and I'm really surprised I haven't brought this up yet because I mention it fairly often. I have a lot of theories in life. One of my theories is that kissing is like blood types, in that everyone is like, what are you talking about? What I mean when I say that is that certain blood types are universal donors. One blood type is universal recipient, and the other is only compatible with its own type. And I say this, that kissing is like blood types because, especially when I was younger, I kissed so many dads who were terrible kissers, just absolutely awful. But I thought, well, you found someone to procreate with you, so somebody must think you're okay. And then they would often tell me that I was a good kisser. And I'm thinking, why do you think this? So I started developing this theory. I think, okay, they found somebody to procreate with them. They think I'm good. I don't think they are. So maybe they're a universal recipient. They just think everybody is good. Maybe I'm a universal donor. Maybe everybody that kisses me thinks I'm a good kisser. I don't know. I just started seeing this pattern, and I don't know that it correlates to blood type. That would be a very interesting study that I certainly do not have enough data to do. But I think there is something to this compatibility. How many people you are compatible with. Maybe you're compatible with everyone. Maybe you think everyone is compatible with you. I don't know. And I started thinking about it in the context of these dates, where I'm going on these dates and these men keep saying, this was so fun. And I'm like, how was this fun for you? Because it was so not fun for me. So maybe they just think every date's fun. They're a universal recipient. Maybe I'm just a fun date. I'm a universal donor, with a couple exceptions that we've already talked about. I don't know. Anyway, that's just a fun theory that I sometimes like to ask people what they think about that. So if you have comments on my kissing is like blood types theory, let me know. All right, let's get into this week. I will tell you again, it was terrible. Just terrible. Next week is the finale, but I'll also go over I've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of my last week to discuss next week. So we'll see if it gets any better. But this one didn't. So Monday of this week, which was, I think, June 9th. I'm recording way after the fact. Monday, I didn't have a date. I don't remember if I had one and he ghosted. I think I just didn't have one. Anyway, didn't have one, and I did not have the energy to line one up. So what I did instead is in Bumble, when you're paying for it, it shows you everybody who's already said yes to you. And there are categories like nearby, most recently active, new, whatever. So in my new, I had over 150 people there. They just accumulated over, I don't know. This was coming back from Alaska in San Francisco on my layover and not having swiped for a few days. So I had 150 in my new. And let me say this, if you have not been on the dating apps ever, if you are a man, 150 sounds astronomical. It's pretty normal for women. So I want men to hear that and not be discouraged by the numbers, but I want you to hear that and also not be discouraged when you're not getting many matches because the volume is so insane for women. And I think this is true for most women, unless maybe you set your parameters really strict that they can't see you. But anyway, so I scrolled through 150 people or more who had said yes to me. I said yes to maybe 10 of them, maybe. Not good. Not good ratio. Most of the people in that 150 queue were in California from my layover in San Francisco when apparently Bumble sent out an all points bulletin to the city of San Francisco. As I mentioned on a previous episode, just real glad I don't live there. Not my pool. Again, I think if you are into tech bros with lots of money, could be a good pool for you. But for me, not my pool. So that once I took out all the San Francisco guys, there weren't that many left anyway who were even viable. So that didn't turn up a lot, but I did count it as a date because good Lord, that took me a long time to go through all of those. I also went to one of my local coffee shops here, Caliber Coffee. It's a real friendly, cute place. I think I've mentioned it before because I've gone on a couple dates there. While I was there, just ended up talking to a couple girls sitting next to me. Shout out Megan and Ocean. That was so long ago. You probably don't even remember talking to me if you ever hear this, but just a really good conversation, very bonding about dating is hard. I'm just focusing on myself. You know, the kinds of things that we all say at some point. And I mentioned this on a previous episode, but that is one of my main takeaways. Spoiler alert for next week, but we're all looking for love. That's no revelation, but everyone wants to talk about it. We all can relate. We all can bond over this topic in one way or another. And so it's just really sweet to talk to these two girls. I don't even remember how it came up. I know. I was working on the podcast and accidentally took out my headphones and the sound went everywhere. I was like, "Oh, sorry. That's just me talking." And one of them said, "Oh, well, it sounded good." And I said, "Thanks. I'm doing this podcast. I'm going on 40 dates in 40 days. So then we talked about that. One of them told me that her friend had gamified dating, which I think is similar to what I talked about when I was talking about a couple TED Talks a few episodes ago. Just figuring out ways to give a point system to the things that you are most looking for and add up when somebody reaches the threshold of points, that's when you know that you should go on a date. I'm not exactly sure if that's how her friend did it. I do know there was a spreadsheet involved, but nevertheless, that was interesting. And I think it's interesting to hear everybody's different approaches. I know one of my friends told me that her friend used to keep a whiteboard of all of her dates. There are different approaches. Whatever works, you go for it. And I think the gamification did work for her friend. So maybe that's something to try. On Tuesday, I still didn't have a date, but I decided to go out. I think I'd mentioned before, I pulled my followers on the tip jar for places that are good for talking to people in real life. And so I decided to try this. And I went to two different places. One is one of my least favorite bars in Nashville, Mother's Ruin. I don't recommend it, but during the week, which is when people told me to go, during the week, it is a chill vibe. People were sitting in the bar. It was friendly. I did end up meeting a guy who we went on a date the next day. I'll talk about him in a minute. So it worked. I was just sitting there and he started talking to me. So it did work. Then I went to Barrel Proof, which is one of my favorite bars in town. And I didn't talk to many people at the bar, but it was full. I could see how on a different day, people might be more chatty or whatever. I did talk to somebody behind the bar. Typical for me, I picked the owner. I didn't know he's the owner. And of course he has girlfriend or partner, someone. He is someone. So that didn't go very far. But both are pretty good bars, I think, in terms of talking to people. Just if you go to Mother's Ruin, definitely go during the week. So Wednesday, I went out with my date from Mother's Ruin. And let me tell you, this child, let me clarify for YouTube, he was not a child. He was 24 years old. I did not know that because obviously if I had, I don't think I would have gone. When he came up to me at the bar, he looked very young. And Mother's Ruin is a younger bar. But his buddy there looked about my age. So I thought, well, he's probably younger than me, but maybe he just has a baby face. Well, we go to the restaurant and we're talking. And I said something about living in Virginia Beach in my 20s. And I was like, how old are you, by the way? He said 24. And I did not laugh. I'm so glad I didn't laugh, but I almost laughed because what am I doing? Unfortunately, he did not ask me my age. I had no interest in telling him. Had he asked, I would have said, I'll tell you on our second date, which of course was never going to happen. But this 24-year-old was the best date. In terms of the date itself, he made a reservation at a nice place. He was very assertive, but not aggressive, but assertive and confident, expressed his interest, asked me questions. The best caliber date I had had thus far. Now, I wasn't interested, not the least of which is because of his age, but for many reasons. I didn't think we were a good fit. But I just want him, I don't think he'll ever listen to this either. I didn't tell him about it, but I just want him to know that he is a really, really good date. And my brother and I were speculating about this and wondered if maybe because he's only 24, he has not been jaded yet. He's not bitter. So he's happy to go to a nice dinner instead of just let's go to happy hour somewhere. Let's go to a dive bar. Or maybe he's just a really good guy. I don't know. But I just left that date so impressed with this 24-year-old and how he treated me. And I just wish that, well, I guess. I could text him. I still have his number and be like, I'm just proud of you. That sounds very 40-year-old of me, but I am proud of him. So anyway, he told me he was down here to interview for a job, which I don't know if he got or not, but he was pretty confident he was going to get it. And he said, I'll let you know if I get it. And then when I move down, we can get together. But we never talked again after that day. But he was a really nice guy. That night on Bumble, I matched with somebody who follows me on the tip jar, and it was really cute. He said, hey, is this one of my favorite Nashville accounts? And I said, well, yes, it is. And he said, I'd love to take you out. I don't want to be on your podcast. And I said, totally fine. You can either wait, because I'll be done in a week with my 40 dates. Or you can come, but you will be on the podcast, but I promise I'll be nice. And he said, okay, I'll be brave. So that was really cute. We went out. I'll talk about him next episode because we went out the following week. But I thought that whole interaction was really cute. And I was really excited to go meet him. Thursday. Lord, this is one of those dates that will go down in history as just terrible. I will tell this story for years to come. So I went out with this police officer, which is not, like I talked about in the military, I never want to eliminate a whole group of people based on their job. But if I were going to eliminate a whole group of people based on their job, it would be police officers. And that is not intended as any disrespect towards their position or towards their role in the community or anything like that. That is based on my experience with police officers and their level of intelligence, their level of personality. I think some, definitely not all, some are people who were in the military. They're not the sharpest tools in the military shed that then go to continue their career as cop. Again, I'm saying this as a gross generalization based on my personal experience. So many other people listening to this would be like, that is not at all accurate based on my experience. And great, good. I'm just saying, if there were ever a group that I was going to eliminate based on their job, it would be cops. So anyway, this police officer, he was a responder for an event that was very traumatic. And I don't think I can say what it was without giving too much information about who he is. So I won't. But I will say it was an extremely traumatic event that he was one of the first responders for. And so he has trauma from it, PTSD, totally valid and sympathetic to that. I really am. I'm so sorry he went through that and really grateful for the way that that situation was handled by the police. That being said, because of everything he's gone through, he hates Nashville and he is so negative about everything about the city. And Randy and I talked about last week how I was very negative in Georgia and in DC both. So I have been guilty on occasion of what I am accusing this guy of. I'm saying that up front. Nevertheless, I absolutely love Nashville. Most people that live here absolutely love it. And he just keeps going on about how terrible it is. And early on in the conversation, he said Nashville was the 12th most dangerous city in the US. And I thought that is blatantly false. There's just absolutely no way that is correct. I know that's not correct, but you're a cop. I'm not going to correct you. We'll just let it go. But by the end of the day, I was so irritated with him. I brought it back up and I was like, and that's not true. Nashville's not the 12th most dangerous city. He's like, well, we saw some article. Maybe it's the 21st. I said, honestly, 21st, I would believe because it might be the 21st largest city. But there is a big difference between 12th and 21st. I was like, I can name off the top of my head 12 cities that are more dangerous than Nashville. Just off the dome. And he was from New Jersey. And so he pulls up this list of the most dangerous cities. And number 4 on the list is Atlantic City. And I was like, where's Atlantic City? Is that in New Jersey? In New Jersey. Atlantic City, New Jersey. New Jersey, right? I was being so obnoxious. I don't think he was savvy enough to understand that I was making fun of him, but I definitely was. He's already complained about Nashville many times. He complained that our margarita, which was a normal size margarita, very standard, was $8, y'all, or $9, whatever it was, $8 or $9. In Nashville, that's like at least 40% off the average price of a cocktail. And I said, that's pretty cheap for Nashville. And he was like, well, it's so small. It was a 16 ounce, like a tumbler, like a normal size margarita. And I just said, okay. He said, I used to drink pitchers for $5, which I find hard to believe that has happened since like 1978. But nevertheless, I said, okay, where? And he's like, well, this was like 2019. That was 6 years ago, buddy. A lot has changed since 2019. A lot, including inflation and prices. So he's already complained about a bunch of stuff. I already think he's not the sharpest tool in the shed for various reasons, which I suspected going in. But I'd already lined up the date. I lined it up before I knew he was a cop. We were not on the same page at all, just setting up the date. And so, like I talked about before, I'm just pretty good at assessing intellectual compatibility with me. I just am because I worked at a law school and I teach and whatever. I just knew we weren't going to, but I'd already set it up. So let's go. Maybe I'll be surprised. So I wasn't surprised. But the kicker, the thing that I will talk about for the rest of my life is early on in the conversation, we're talking about his children. He's younger. He, I think, was 31. So he's younger, but a full-grown man. He has children. He asked me, not, do you want children? Or do you like children? Have you thought about having children? None of those normal, polite questions. His question, can you even still have kids? That was his question. And I wish I'd been more sarcastic. I wish that I had said something like, can you still create them? Do your parts still work? I wish I'd said something snarky back, but I was so caught off guard by the rudeness of this question. First of all, you're asking my personal medical history. Second of all, it's incredibly ignorant. It's 2025. People are having children in their 40s all the time, but it's just so rude. And so I did say, well, my mom was 41 when my brother was born. One of my friends, her mom was 45 when she was born. And I start listing off people, but these are people like from the 80s that I'm talking about. So how much more now? I should have started listing off all my friends that are having babies right now. So I just was so blown away by the level of stupidity and rudeness in this question. He never recovered. He wouldn't have anyway, but he definitely never recovered from that. It does remind me one time in my 20s, there was a guy at the church who I was not interested in for many reasons that I won't get into, but I was definitely not interested in him in any way, ever, for any reason. But he asked me out, and the way he worded it was very vague. Like, do you want to hang out sometime? So I knew it was a date, but we went to church together, and it felt, to me, I felt like saying no would have implied that I don't even want to know you as a person. I just felt really conflicted about it. So I went. He talked nonstop the entire time. It was so terrible. I just didn't say anything almost. Well, at the time, I sang on my church worship team. We did a couple plays. I was in them, whatever. And he asked me in the course of this conversation, he said, did the church make you take singing lessons? No, they did not make the unpaid volunteer take singing lessons. And he said, oh, okay. Because the first time I heard you, I wanted to just cover my ears. But the second time, they didn't bleed. Literally, that's what he said. And I got mad at him, obviously. And he said, no, I'm just being honest. People get mad at me when I'm honest. And I said, literally, I was like, life lesson. There is a difference between being honest and being rude. That was unnecessary. That was rude. So needless to say, we did not go out again. He did ask me out again. And I said, sure, we can hang out in a group. That's what I said. But he thought it was because he had offended me, which did not help. But that was so far down the list of reasons I was not interested in him that I wasn't really that concerned. And fast forward, he, I think, is in prison now for abuse of minors. So dodged a bullet there. So to wrap up with the police officer, the final straw for me, after the complaints about the cost of the margaritas, after saying Nashville is so expensive, after asking if I can even still have kids, the final straw for me was when I said, we were talking about I'd like to buy a house. I probably want to live out in West Nashville in this particular neighborhood because that's the most convenient area of town that I can afford. And he said, oh yeah, you can leave between he said, oh yeah, you can live between a crack house and a tall skinny. And at that point, I literally was like, okay, let's go, which was rude of me. But I was so fed up with him. Everything was so terrible. Everything was so negative. And I think even when I lived in Georgia, even at my worst, I said I didn't like living in Georgia. I would say I didn't like my work, whatever. I think I read the room. If somebody really loved it and was getting irritated about every negative thing I was saying, I would have stopped saying them. And I did not just have a litany of negative for the whole time. If I did, no wonder they never went out with me again. But I don't think I was as socially unaware as this dude. I could not take it anymore. We'd already paid. We were ready to go. So I just said, okay, let's go. And we did. To his credit, he texted me. To his cop credit that thinks Nashville is the most dangerous city in America, he did text me when I got home to make sure that I was safe. But yeah, he had even been confused about when we were setting up the date. I said, how about 5? He's like, AM or PM? Obviously PM, obviously, especially because I'd said, are you free tomorrow night? So there's a context clue. But just from the get-go, we're never going to be a good fit, but it just went so much worse than I possibly could have imagined. So that one was a little hard for me to recover from because it was so terrible. Fortunately, on Friday, I didn't have to go on a date. I was going to a singles event. And this is one that happens every month in the factory at Franklin, which if you're not from here, it's a big mall, for lack of a better word, marketplace with all these individual vendors and restaurants and stuff. Franklin tends to skew older and wealthier than Nashville. So I thought maybe this older crowd would do me well for a dating event. Well, I was a little too old. I was one of the youngest people there. So not exactly what I was looking for. Of course, there were more women than men, but not grossly outnumbered. There were more, but there were enough men. The women were largely very attractive, all of them, regardless of age. They were attractive, fit. The men, not as much. There was a smaller ratio of attractive ones. And some, and I kind of expect this at a lot of singles events, but just some that you kind of have to avoid eye contact because you can feel them bearing down on you, and you know this is not going to be a good fit. You know that this is going to be a long conversation that you're going to get trapped into, and it's easier to just not make eye contact in the first place. Of course, I want to be kind to everybody, but sometimes it's just easier to avoid it altogether. I ended up talking to a bunch of girls, and that was fun. We had a great time. Of course, we end the night with, do we really even need men? And we decided no, but we do want them, which is the conflict. Like I said, it ended up being a fun night. But man, these singles events are tough. And as much as I talk about the dating apps being in decline and needing to meet people more in real life and so on, I just think the in-person events are difficult, especially if you're an introvert. I'm an extrovert and I find them difficult. Just talking to strangers and getting the ratio correct, men to women, having enough quality people of both genders there to talk to, finding somebody who's compatible with you, ages. It's just really tough. So glad I tried it. Probably won't go to that particular singles event again. Might go to some others, but not that one. Saturday, I lined up a last minute coffee date. He canceled because he had to go to the ER. I was like, okay, sure you do. I do think he maybe did have to go to the ER because he told me later that day what had happened. He tore his shoulder, something like that. And then like a week later, he followed up, oh yeah, I'm still healing. I wasn't that interested to begin with. I just had a feeling. I had sort of let the conversation die and he kept reviving it. And since I needed a date, I said, okay, well, let's try it. So then when there was a legitimate reason that the date was canceled, conceivably legitimate, assuming he was telling the truth, thought, no, we're just going to let this one go. So never did meet up with that guy. But I just thought, how funny. What's the wildest reason you've been canceled on? Well, he had to go to the ER. Maybe. Probably. Sunday, I didn't do anything. I knew I had 2 dates scheduled on Monday. So I just thought, that'll make up. I'm going to take a break. And so I did. At this point, I'm at 36 dates at this point of 40. I only have 3 days left, but I have 2 lined up for Monday. So theoretically, I could hit 40. Now, of course, of those, they're not all dates. Some are these singles events. Some are when I was ghosted last minute and didn't have a chance to line anybody else up. Or when he canceled because he had to go to the ER. So not 36 actual people, but 36 attempts. So very close to hitting my goal. Next week, we'll talk about if I hit it. We'll talk about if I find somebody in the last 4 dates, and then sort of my overall impressions and takeaways, look into some of the numbers, how I met these guys, their careers. Not as many military. Towards the end, there were fewer military than at the beginning. So yeah, just kind of break some of that down and see if there's any information to be gleaned from that. And then we'll talk about what's next for me and for the podcast. But yeah, so that is my final full week of dating completed, and then a few more to go. But I think that's it for this week. So thank you again for joining me. Remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of them. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at 40 Dates Podcast, number 40 at 40 Dates Podcast. And just be sure to catch up if you're behind so that you can be ready for next week's episode, the finale. And that'll be exciting. So thank you again for listening. Thank you for being here. And as always, wish me luck.